A young knight named Sir Dashing Jr. only got knighted because they couldn't knight his dad twice. Now he's determined to prove that he's worthy of his new title. Along with an awkward friar, an aspiring ranger, and a book-loving orc, Sir DJ will venture across the territory to find the amulet of the goddess, proving that he's worthy of his knightly title. The Legend of by Aaron N. Hall is an affectionate parody of the fantasy genre, receiving praise from audiences and critics alike. Go to aaronnhall.com to download a free early copy of The Legend of before its release on February 25th, 2025. So what are you waiting for? Download it today. That's AARON, another N, HALL.com.
Reading J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion can be quite the daunting adventure, especially if you're new to the world of Middle-earth beyond the movies. It's a different style, more like a rich tapestry of myths than a traditional novel, and keeping track of all the names can be a challenge. That's why I'm thrilled to chat with someone who has recently embarked on this journey. Today I'm joined by Kenzi, the avid reader behind the Kenzies Cozy Booksta Instagram account, who is reading the Silmarillion for the first time. If you, like Kenzi, are attempting to read the Silmarillion for the first time, or maybe the first time in a long time, then head to ringspodcast.com/guide to download my tips for first-time readers. Kenzi, welcome to Lord of the Rings. Let's wander.
Hello! Happy to be here.
Fantastic. So how did you first find Tolkien? And not necessarily just the Silmarillion, but any of Tolkien's works. How did you first find Tolkien?
Oh my gosh. I remember, I think it was in middle school, my brother turned on the extended version of the Two Towers. So halfway through, I think my parents got the DVDs from Goodwill randomly.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I'll tell my dad about it, and he's like, I've never seen the movies. So I think my brother turned them on randomly one day, and it's that's a 4-hour tour. So
that's a commitment, yeah.
So we watched The Two Towers and then Return of the King, and I don't think I even watched Fellowship until 2 years ago. So I was,
oh, wow.
I was so lost, but I really liked Legolas. So
yes, yes. Absolutely. Legolas definitely gets a lot of women to come to Lord of the Rings. It's fantastic. My 6-year-old loves watching Lord of the Rings because Legolas is so pretty, as she likes to say.
Oh, he's gorgeous.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. So your brother introduced it to you halfway through the Two Towers, but you stayed, you committed. That's fabulous. What inspired you to pick up the Silmarillion this year?
I read Lord of the Rings last year for the first time,
mm-hmm.
and found a ton of really great accounts, specifically like Kayake and Breebird and the Silmarillion on Instagram and on Threads. And on Instagram, Breebird did a video that was talking about the Maiar.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Maiar. Mm-hmm.
How, who is it? Gandalf was is he a Maiar? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he is. Yeah.
I'm still halfway through the Silmarillion, so I don't know everything. But how he had learned from one of the Valar, and she had just done this video talking about their relationship, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think I need to read the Silmarillion to understand the beginning of everything, because
mm-hmm.
I think just reading Lord of the Rings on its own is beautiful and it's great, but you can definitely feel lost reading it the first time, because you're like, there's so many names, and I know that there's so much history that's going on that I am so out of the loop on.
Mm-hmm.
And Tolkien in general, reading Lord of the Rings was really scary, just starting out, because it's harder to read. And I was really scared of reading the Silmarillion for that reason. But finally diving into it, it's been so worth it.
Yeah, I'm really interested when reading Tolkien can be scary for the first time, and especially the Silmarillion. A lot of people will read The Hobbit and they're like, oh, great, that's a great children's tale. But, there's a lot more going on there than just a children's tale. And then they shift to Lord of the Rings and they're like, okay, this is a bit darker, a bit more adult. And then you shift to the Silmarillion, which is a category all on its own. So far, has the Silmarillion, has it met your expectations? Has it been scarier or challenging?
I think a little bit of both. I think I do have, so I went to Bible college, and so I have a lot of background in reading scripture text.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first part, I don't know how to say it.
The Ayulindale?
Yes.
Yes, the Ayulindale.
So reading that felt easier than it may feel for people that like are not used to reading like historical texts or like scripture.
Mm-hmm.
So that felt like a really great ease in for me because I was like, oh, this is beautifully written, and one that I can track pretty well just because of my background. But I think that's what got my attention the most. I do think like chapters in, it's still challenging. Like it's not necessarily an easy read, but I'm not scared of it anymore. It's more like, okay, I'm not going to understand everything the first time. That's okay. I can read it time and time again and recognize the characters, recognize the names. Because even now, like halfway through, I'm like, oh, I recognize who Fëanor is, or like I recognize these names that I would not have like understood the first chapter of this book, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely okay, and that's actually my number one tip for first-time readers is number one, plan for multiple read-throughs, at least 2 read-throughs, and then as you're reading through it the first time, don't try to get every little detail. Like, don't follow every single character, don't follow every single name. Just try to kind of get that high-level like gist of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you read it through the second time, it'll like start to click and make more sense. That's where you kind of follow more of the characters more closely, and that's where it will really start to come together for you. So that's interesting that you kind of have a background in reading scripture, and that's fantastic. And I've been a Christian all my life, not afraid of reading the Bible, reading scripture. And I would agree that I think sort of that skill set or that background can be helpful when it comes to approaching a book like the Silmarillion. Not to say that it is scripture, but it's often likened to be like, oh, this is the Old Testament of Lord of the Rings, right? Because you've got the creation story, you've got all these kind of background type things. And so a lot of people kind of equate it to be that way. What was like your initial like assumption about the Silmarillion before you started diving in?
I didn't have any. I honestly, I knew very little about the like Middle Earth realm. I knew very little about Tolkien. If anything, I knew more about like C.S. Lewis, and I knew that he and Tolkien were friends before I started reading anything like Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion. So I think I went in very blind. I honestly had no idea that there was even a creation story. I didn't know that this was prequel almost to like Lord of the Rings. So, but what I had heard the most was that it's a history book, so don't be too scared. You may want to read some other like shorter stories by Tolkien before you dive into the Silmarillion. And I don't necessarily agree. I think it does, like, it could read like a history book, like most definitely, because it's very fast paced. There's not like super fine detail in every single chapter, but I enjoy that. And I did like post on Threads once that I was like, it feels a lot more like short stories in the sense that you feel like a conclusion at the end of each chapter. Not that they can be like disjointed or separated, because I definitely think like it's one full story. But it lends itself to being able to, you can stop and take it slow instead of like just read it in one day, which I would not recommend.
That would be intense.
Right, it would break my brain a little bit. But I read 2 or 3 chapters at a time, and that's like all my brain can kind of handle. Because I do find myself like reading a couple sentences over, usually like in the reading. But yeah, I don't think like the fear of the story really got to me, or like any of the like, I don't know, feelings beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how you say that it is sort of like a collection of connected short stories, right? And I think sometimes you'll say, oh, it's a bunch of short stories, and people are like, no, it's not. It's one big like thing. And it's like, well, yes and no. Like all of these little stories they're like isolated packets in and of themselves, but they also connect to a wider thing. And I think that speaks to some of the talent that Tolkien had, which was he had this amazing ability to say, here is a succinct story with a beginning, middle, and an end. However, all stories can be expanded. You can go broader, you can go deeper. And so it's like in any given story, here's all of these connection points that could connect to another different story. And
Mhm.
I guess another analogy would be like a Lego brick. Like you can create a specific set of you can create a specific Lego set with Lego pieces, but then you can take those same pieces and interconnect them with another Lego set, right?
Yeah,
I've got a couple of boys and they love playing with Legos. So maybe that's why it's on my mind. But
right.
I love that analogy of Silmarillion as a collection of interconnected short stories.
Yeah. I think it makes it easier to digest if you don't feel the pressure of reading all of it at once. I think
Mm-hmm.
that from when I talk to people, that's a big thing. They're like, I tried to read it all at once and it overwhelmed me and I couldn't. I put it down and I can't read it again.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe just try taking it a little slower, even just read a few pages at a time. Don't feel so overwhelmed by this monstrosity of a book at the
Yeah.
get-go.
Yeah, and in fact, I also saw this as somebody's advice online too, was just pick one or two of the stories, like one or two of the chapters, and just read that one, and like expand from there. Like I would say, go pick like the tale of Beren and Luthien. Like if you haven't read anything in the Silmarillion before, just go to Beren and Luthien and start there. Like that's a good enough story to give you good enough, like just to get your feet wet, in the first age tales of the Silmarillion. So I'm going to guess, Kenzie, that you probably have not gotten to the Beren and Luthien tale yet in the Silmarillion.
No, not yet.
Okay, all right. So tell me, how far have you gotten? How many chapters are you in?
Let me get my handy dandy Silmarillion.
Fabulous.
I'm on page 111. It was easy to remember. So that means I'm in the Return of Noldor. Is that how you...
Okay, the Return of the Noldor. Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to open up my handy dandy reference book as well. Right here, Silmarillion. Let's see, Return of the Noldor. Okay, so that's chapter 13 in the Quenta Silmarillion. Fantastic. So you have just read about the origins of men. You've read about the sun and the moon. You've read about the two trees and what happened to the two trees. Thus far, let's see, you're probably about a third, maybe halfway through the Silmarillion. What scene or character has really resonated with you so far, and why?
Oh my gosh. You're going to make me think. They're all so good. I think there are some that stick out to me, and then there's one that just makes me mad.
Okay.
Feanor.
Feanor? Mm-hmm.
He ticks me off. He makes me angry. I don't really relate, but he makes me feel feelings.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about that. Why does Feanor make you so angry?
He's just, like, he's wildly headstrong and so talented, and it can all be used for great purposes, but he's so caught up in himself and his need for revenge and avenging that it blinds him, and he just makes stupid decisions. So
yeah, absolutely. Like one of those stupid decisions was, we're going to steal boats from our fellow elves, and so much so that we're going to kill our fellow elves, the kinslaying at Alqualonde. Sorry if that was a spoiler if you haven't read the Silmarillion. Sorry, it's been around for 50 years, so go read the Silmarillion. But yeah, Feanor does a lot of bad things for an elf. Like if you've seen the movies, you look at these elves and they're like these otherworldly angelic beings, and yes, they are. But Feanor is definitely a different kind of elf than what you see in the Peter Jackson films.
He's the worst.
He's the worst. He's a pretty bad guy.
Yeah.
He's a pretty bad guy.
Yeah.
All right. So what other scenes or characters have stuck out to you so far?
I have the shortest memory when it comes to what I'm reading. Yes. Luthien was born, and the white flowers of the Nifredil?
Nifredil? Mm-hmm.
Nifredil, yes. Came forth to greet her as stars from the earth. That was the prettiest line. Oh my gosh. I was like, if I get to read about her, that will make me happy. And I will, and I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Luthien is a really amazing character. Definitely inspired by Tolkien's wife, Edith, who he absolutely loved and adored. So much so, I don't know, maybe you know this already, but on their gravestone, after Edith died, Tolkien was insistent that Luthien be engraved on her gravestone, because that whole character is her. It was Edith, his wife.
Yeah.
And then on Tolkien's gravestone is engraved Beren, right? So you've got the tale of Beren and Luthien, and when you go read Luthien's story, you'll see wildly different than Feanor and his hubris. You've got Luthien and just how awesome she really, really is.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic story. I can't wait for you to get to that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, Luthien.
I think the other character that stuck out to me was Melian. Is it Melian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's pretty amazing. Melian, one of the Maiar, the wife of the king Thingol, and she's created this barrier around their kingdom of Doriath. Yeah, so
that was real cool when I read that. I was like, I strive to be her. That's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So far, what has shocked or surprised you in the Silmarillion?
Taxes was waiting around for your taxes to be done, which led to worrying about not getting any money back. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes in a day to get you up to $4,000 fast with a refund advance loan. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Expert filing only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Refund advance has $0 loan fees and 0% APR. Refund advance loans may be issued by First Century Bank N.A. or WebBank. Terms apply. Subject to approval.
Hair thinning can happen for so many reasons. Whether it's stress or hormones or anything, at Nutrafol we've learned that real change starts below the surface. Our hair growth supplements take a whole body approach and target the key root causes of hair thinning, so you can see visibly thicker, stronger hair in 3 to 6 months.
Hair growth starts from the inside at Nutrafol.com. That's Nutrafol.com.
Shocked and surprised. I'll tell you what didn't shock and surprise me was Melkor acting like a toddler. More acting like a toddler and just destroying everything because he's having a tantrum. I also have a 2-year-old, so I recognize the behavior.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think what surprised me was I'm going to say it wrong again. The Ayunulindale.
The Ayulindale?
Yes, the that.
The creation story?
Yes, yeah. That. I think that surprised me most of all because it was just having it be the first thing that I read in this book and it be that pretty to make me just want to reread it and be in awe.
Yeah.
And not necessarily story-wise it surprised me, but just I was shocked at how well Tolkien could write that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is beautiful, and it really does demonstrate Tolkien's ability as a master of language. He was a philologist in his academic career, which is somebody who studies the history of language, and did several different translations that are of some pretty key works, and the Ayulindale really shows his ability to string words together in a beautiful way. It's a really fantastic creation story. You mentioned C.S. Lewis before, and I remember reading The Magician's Nephew as a kid, and that creation story that was there with Aslan and all the animals. And yeah. I remember as a kid, I was like, wow, this is really beautiful. This is amazing. My heart was touched, I was like, man, I feel like I've just been reading scripture and communicating with God here.
Right.
And it's fabulous that way. I read that same story as an adult, and I didn't have the same feeling. And I'm like, maybe it's me because my heart's been hardened. I don't know. But I say that because every time I go back and I read the Ayulindale and read about the creation of Middle-earth and Tolkien's ability to describe this so beautifully, again, my heart is touched every single time when I come back to look at the creation of Middle-earth.
I almost with C.S. Lewis's work in Narnia, that almost feels like a truncated version of what Tolkien would have done with Narnia. So I think it's okay that you don't feel the shock and awe that you did the first time you read Magician's Nephew, because you're reading that in-depth, really stunning language of Tolkien. And it's kind of hard to come back from that. But I did read Narnia I reread it because it was read to us in elementary school. But I read it for myself as an adult this last year around Christmas time. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is really, really pretty. And just being able to read C.S. Lewis's works after having read like just Lord of the Rings, not just Lord of the Rings, but after having read Lord of the Rings and then now reading the Silmarillion, it feels like almost a upward trajectory of just beautiful writing, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And they collaborated a lot together, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien did. In fact, we probably would not have The Lord of the Rings if it weren't for Lewis encouraging Tolkien. He'd be like, hey, Tolkien, you need to write these stories down and share them. They had this group of inklings. They'd get together at the pub and they would read out loud and critique each other's work and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we need to thank C.S. Lewis that we got The Lord of the Rings, because otherwise I don't think Tolkien would have had the discipline to sit down and finish it without C.S. Lewis's encouragement, for sure.
That makes me question, like, how much influence did his son have in, like, Tolkien's son have in, like, getting all of his work published too? Was that a big influence on him?
Yeah, I would absolutely say, and we're referring to Christopher here, Christopher Big Time. Like, there's, I don't know if you probably haven't, but the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, a large bulk of those letters are written to his son Christopher during World War II, and Tolkien is like, he's painstakingly copying these drafts of Lord of the Rings, and he's sending them to his son Christopher, and he's getting Christopher's feedback back. And at one point, he tells his son, and I'm going to paraphrase this here because it's off the top of my head, but at one point he says, Lewis, he called him Jack. Jack gave me some feedback, but I much rather would have your feedback, my son Christopher, whatnot. And so it's just fun how Tolkien's like kind of collaborating with these other people and getting feedback, but he prizes Christopher's over anybody else's.
That's so cool.
And then it was after Tolkien's death that the Silmarillion was actually finally published, and that was in large part due to Christopher going through the colossal mounds of unorganized notes and manuscripts and drafts and being able to pull something together that we did get the Silmarillion and several other publications besides.
Oh, Tolkien is like just a gift to this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. In one of your posts, you said this: fighting the urge to post practically all of the Silmarillion on here, this writing is stunning. How does the writing style of the Silmarillion compare to other books that you've read?
Oh, significantly different. I think just the language takes a lot of getting used to. Some of it is just the dialogue he writes in like Old English style, like King James Version style, where you're like thus and thou and art and all those things. So that takes getting used to. I mean, I've read Cornelia Funke in the last year, which is way more like poetic writing. But this Tolkien just, I don't know, in the Silmarillion, it's just a lot more like heady vocabulary that some of it I'm having to look up. But yeah, it's different for sure. But it's so pretty. Oh, I wish more people would write like that. But I also wonder, like, would it feel disingenuous if people wrote like this now too? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. There is sort of the different, like, to me, it was just like he was an artist and his chosen medium was language. It was words, and at one point he almost said, like, I was inventing languages as a child. It came as naturally to me as breathing did. And it's like, like, well, when you have a natural gift like that, of course you're going to pull out this beautiful stuff. Like, so you take like Leonardo da Vinci or Picasso or any Bob Ross, if you will, like take whatever artist you want and instead of paint or pastel, whatever, give them language, then you're going to get J.R.R. Tolkien. And it is absolutely beautiful language.
Yeah.
Almost every single line of it, every single paragraph of it is just absolutely beautiful, beautiful to read. What inspired you to start reading books and sharing them on Instagram and Threads?
Well, I have been reading since I was probably about 10 now. And I'm 29 now. So like a good 19 years of reading, but I did take a long gap, but I started with Nancy Drew just reading poolside as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of fell in love with it, and then found Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funke and fell in love with fantasy. And kind of never went back. I've always really loved fantasy. But in high school, I kind of started hating reading because you were required to read everything, so that took the fun out of it, you know. And then, really, just a couple of years ago, I picked up The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, and I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I forgot how fun reading could be. And as a new mom, it was an escape for me because you're doing those late night feedings, or just like it's really a very repeated rhythm every single day. So having something to escape to was huge for me. And so I started reading a little bit more. So one year I read maybe 2 books, and then the next I read about 20. And I was like, oh, this is really fun. But I don't really have people to talk to about it because my husband's he likes reading handbooks and manuals. He's not necessarily a fiction reader. And we live like with his family, and one of his family members is a really big reader, but I just didn't really have a community that I could talk to. So I was like, I think I just need to start posting about it, so that I can find people that enjoy what I enjoy and can just riff and stuff. So I made Kenzie's Cozy Booksta, and it's been super fun for me. It was also just it's been a creative outlet for me. I just completed my master's in marketing, and so I was like, I want to know how to utilize that skill as well as just talk about something that I really love and grow a platform that creates a safe and fun community for people that just love reading books of all kinds, especially old and nostalgic ones. So I've just been reading a bunch of classics, including Lord of the Rings, Narnia, all that fun stuff. And it's just been a really, really fun experience. And then obviously Threads is just where I can be goofy and post really randomly and sporadically and probably too much about books that I'm reading, and it's been a fun community on there too.
yeah I love it, and I've only started really being really serious about Threads in the last, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and I think that's where you and I originally connected. So it's been really awesome to just kind of find your people that you can talk to about stuff on Threads and Instagram. And you recently just passed 10,000 followers on Instagram. Is that right?
Yeah, I did.
That's insane. That's a lot of people. That's really cool.
Yeah. It's partially because of a raccoon puppet that we picked up at Barnes and Noble. So that was the root of it. But it's been really cool to see that and just see the community grow. It's been awesome.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And for anyone who's listening right now, we'll put a link in the show notes if you want to go find Kenzie on Instagram or Threads. Are those kind of your 2 big platforms that you're on right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes for you there. What are your tips as a first-time reader of the Silmarillion and an avid reader of a lot of other books? What are your tips for first-time readers who are trying to read the Silmarillion for the first time?
Take it slow and don't get bogged down by names, locations, tribe names, elf names, all the things. Those will come with time. It definitely is a book that you should take your time with. I said one day, the Silmarillion wasn't written in a day. It doesn't need to be read in a day. And I think that applies for a lot of books that are scary, but this one especially. And I think with how pretty it is, it's okay to take your time because it lets you savor it that much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your advice. It wasn't written in a day, so it doesn't need to be read in a day. I'm going to share something with you. This might blow your mind a little bit. I hope it does. But the beginnings of the Silmarillion started in 1917 when Tolkien was serving in World War I, and he was on home. He had gotten sick. He got trench fever, like many soldiers did. He got sent home back to England, and while on sick leave, he started writing down the beginnings of the story that became the Fall of Gondolin, which is included in the Silmarillion. You haven't gotten to that yet. It's sort of more towards the end.
Yeah.
But that's where it began. And later, life life catches up with all of us. And, the war finished. He marries Edith. He has kids. He gets a job. All life happens, and then he publishes The Hobbit as his first fictional publication, and boom, it's a wild success. Out of anybody's imagination, Tolkien was probably the most surprised that it was a success, and his publishers come back to him and say, "Hey, Tolkien, we want a sequel to The Hobbit." And he says, "Well, I've got this draft of a book that I call the Silmarillion. Can we publish that?" And his publishers were like, "No, that's a little outside of, I think, what people are expecting, And so you go read his letters. There's this fun back and forth that Tolkien is having with publishers, where for decades, he's trying to convince people to publish the Silmarillion, and instead he is sort of directed into writing the Lord of the Rings, which were fabulous. We all love that. But even the Silmarillion was not even published while Tolkien was alive. He died in 1973, I think it was, and the Silmarillion was first published in 1977. So think about that. The beginnings of the stories in 1917, finally published after his death in 1977. That's 60 years where Tolkien had these stories. Tolkien and his son had these stories, tinkered with them, drafted them, thought about them, rewrote them. And so take it slow. I think that's great advice, right? Take it slow, because Tolkien obviously did not rush the creation of this story. Yep. And so it would behoove us to not rush the consumption or the experience of this story as well.
Yeah. I also think it's a great encouragement for people that are writing their own stories, that Tolkien got rejected too. His stuff got rejected.
Yep.
So it's okay. You can take your time. Don't feel like you're behind or just being forgotten or left alone in the dust with your beautiful manuscript. You still have opportunity left.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I don't think The Hobbit was published until he was 47 or something.
Wow.
So, and I'm in my late 30s right now, and I'm thinking, man, I gotta catch up and get some success. But it's it's okay. We're all following in Tolkien's footsteps. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
We'll always be right on time.
Yes, it's fantastic. So for the final question here, and this can be as broad as you would like to make it, but what influence have Tolkien's works had on your life?
Ooh. That's a thinker.
Taxes was waiting around for your taxes to be done, which led to worrying about not getting any money back. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes in a day to get you up to $4,000 fast with a refund advance loan. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Expert filing only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Refund advance has $0 loan fees and 0% APR. Refund advance loans may be issued by First Century Bank, N.A. or WebBank. Terms apply. Subject to approval.
Especially having read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings last year, that there's so much joy to be had in the journey itself and not necessarily just the ending. I think Bilbo, though he was one that would rather have stayed home, which is very much like myself, he still had a lot of joy in the journey, and he wasn't the one that ended the story, He wasn't the one that got the ring into Mordor, He was the one that kind of catapulted Frodo into the journey. So it's okay that sometimes you may not reach the destination that you have in mind, or you may not complete a specific journey, but that doesn't mean that it's over. But the journey is so important, and there are so many beautiful things that happen along the way, friends that you make. Yeah, I think that's more than anything, that's what Tolkien's work has taught me.
Yeah, just to experience the adventure.
Yeah.
When the opportunity comes. Yeah, that's beautiful. It reminds me, there's a conversation that Sam and Frodo have. I think it's in the Two Towers, where Sam is sort of reflecting on the power of stories, and he. I just remembered something I wanted to say earlier, but that's okay. And Sam says something along the lines of, "Don't the great tales ever end? The great tales never end." And it's true that the greatest tales don't end, right?
Mhm.
Our parts in the journey come and go. Like Bilbo had a part to play in finding the ring and helping the dwarves and coming back to the Shire, and then setting Frodo on his quest, and we all have a part to play, but it is the experience of the adventure that really matters more than just the final destination.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that part made me cry when I first read it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You also mentioned too, you took up reading, and it was sort of a way for you use the word escape, right? To escape a little bit. And I think a lot of times people kind of look down at that like, oh, you're just going to escape real life. And it's like, well, there's different kinds of ways of escaping. And Tolkien even mentioned this in an essay that he wrote called On Fairy Stories, where he talked about the power of really good stories is that they do help you to escape, but not just like escape real life or whatever, but they help you to sort of take your mind out of the day-to-day realities that you're experiencing and refresh and recreate and be able to come back into the life that you're living
Mhm.
and have a new energy or a new perspective or a new way of looking at those sorts of things. So when you say reading can be that escape, and that it's less of, not so much an escape, but more of that refreshing and the recreating that can really help you to re-energize and take on the tasks of daily life.
Oh yeah. And I think just in general, they inspire you to take on a new path, or you see yourself reflected in a character and they take you to a place that you wouldn't have thought, I think it's cool. It's just readers have an incredible amount of empathy because we're able to put ourselves in these characters' shoes and understand where they're coming from and understand different points of view. And I think being able to take that and apply it to ourselves when we're feeling down and feeling just not great, but also being able to see characters go from that down, like, really hard place into this wonderful triumph. Like, we have that within our grasp as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Feanor before, and Feanor is not a good guy,
No.
right? And so it's like we could have great empathy for the characters, but we also are learning from characters that we don't want to be like. Like we're learning from Feanor. He's a complicated person, and we don't want to be like Feanor in many situations. We do not want to be like Feanor. So that again is the power of really compelling characters. And Tolkien was just a master of being able to provide a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different characters that you could either try to emulate in your life or try to very much not emulate in your life.
100%.
Yeah. Well, Kenzie, thank you so much. This has been really fantastic. Thank you for wandering Middle-earth with me today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Thank you to this episode's executive producer, The Old One. If you would like to support the Lore of the Rings podcast, visit ringspodcast.com/member. If you found today's wandering of Middle-earth to be inspiring, please share this episode with a friend. Lastly, if you would like to connect with me, I am most active on Threads. Find a link to my profile at ringspodcast.com and tap the @ symbol near the top. And thank you for wandering Middle-earth with me today.